And welcome back to another On Coaching podcast with Magness and Marcus. I am Steve Magness, Deputy Director of High Performance West, joined by my good friend, colleague, John Marcus, Director of High Performance West. John, another glorious day and time to get in another good podcast.
Here to give the people what they want. And the people, you guys want information, but you also want money. And we're here to give you all money. And I'm excited to give money away for free. All you have to do to get $100 or enter to win $100, however the marketing or legal gurus want us to say it, just go to HPW or highperformancewest.com. There's a tab that says $100. Just fill out your name, your email, and let us know your favorite episode. And Steve and I will just pick at random from the big bucket at the end of April the people who enter, and we'll give you $100, and then we'll also give you another $100 for you to give to someone else, another school, or to pay it forward. You can do whatever you want. You just have to give it away, and just let us know how you choose to give it away. And it's awesome. And the reason we're able to do this is because we have a sponsor. And Steve's going to tell you more about our sponsor, but we're thankful that we had the opportunity to have a sponsor, and it's because of the people. So thank you.
Yes, we can do cool things like this thanks to Health IQ. What in the world is Health IQ, you might ask? Well, they're a life insurance company that uses a bunch of science and data to secure lower rates for people who are active and health conscious, right? That's why they want to, help you guys out, help us out, is because they know that runners, cyclists, strength coaches, strength athletes, all of that kind of group are going to be better, better for life insurance. We're going to have more life. So on average, Health IQ customers save between 4 and 33% on their life insurance. So do us a favor, do yourself a favor, and head on over to healthiq.com/oncoaching. There will also be a link in the show notes at Science of Running and highperformancewest.com. So check that out. It's really worth a look. You can see if you qualify simply by filling out their questionnaire, or since you're all runners, by simply showing you have race results or showing your Strava. Like just doing that will get you qualified for those savings. So check it out. healthiq.com/oncoaching.
Well, time out, Jeans, real quick. Not everyone who listens, thankfully, are all runners. We're thankful for the runners who do listen, but we know we have like strength and endurance or strength and conditioning coaches, endurance coaches, and athletes from other sectors, triathlon, ultra, hiking. Even I've heard like soccer coaches and athletes. So because we have an audience, thankfully wider than just runners, Steve and I are going to talk about the bare bone basics today about coaching, because it is about coaching. It's on coaching. And I'm going to let Steve, since he's a scientist here of the duo, continue the introduction to the topic for today.
Oh, man. So this one starts because of, just getting fired up, and whenever we get fired up, things get interesting. So be prepared for a long, hopefully enjoyable rant. And the reason is, I'm a coach for life, right? So I'm always researching, I'm always looking, I'm always going to different classes and seminars and all that stuff. And what I've noticed over my time in doing that is there's always just one slide or one introductory, note in a book or whatever. And it's always, hey, here's the energy system requirements for every race, right? And it'll sit there and it'll be, hey, this is the backbone. 75% of the 1500 is aerobic. 60% of the 800 is aerobic. Whatever it is, it'll just list that. And that's the starting point. And then from there, coaches go in and dive in and say, hey, this is what we need to train based on this energy system here, and this anaerobic or this aerobic system here, or this ATP-PC system here. And it just struck me that we're all, once we get our coach's education, we're all using this bioenergetic model as the foundation for our training philosophy. And as I sat there, the other day, I'm not sure that's the best approach to have. Because I'm not saying it's the wrong approach, but what I'm saying is when we lock ourselves into this bioenergetic model, we reduce the complexity of a human being into this energy systems. Aerobic, anaerobic, ATP, PC, whatever you want to call it. Right? And our goal, our training becomes about checking these boxes and filling these energy system needs, right? Instead of about simply how do we cover this race faster, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, clarify, bioenergetic model is a model that we're focused on solely on the metabolism and the energy and energy substrates and fueling substrates that are used in the metabolic processes. So when you think about the type of training you're doing, if you're coming from a bioenergetic standpoint, what you're coming from is a standpoint of we're engaging this type of lactate threshold, aerobic threshold, anaerobic threshold, ATP, alactate, and glucose. And again, you're thinking more as your point of reference in terms of what the metabolism is supposed to be doing with these different types of pace model. That's a very important perspective to have. However, it should not be the only perspective. And I think if we just stop there, you're doing yourself and you're doing the athletes around you a disservice, because the framework from which I personally operate is a holistic ecosystem framework where we're taking in, yes, the metabolism. That's very critical. You cannot outrun physiology. You must be aware of that. But you cannot outrun hormones. You cannot outrun cognitive perception. You cannot outrun a lot of different elements that maybe we don't have as enough scientific evidence yet upon to draw conclusions, but that are just as, if not more, potent or important when developing the competitive organism that is an athlete, whether it's an endurance athlete, a sprinting athlete, a soccer athlete, what have you. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't contrast the Western train of thought with a more what we call Eastern train of thought. I was recently recommended the book, The Geography of Thought from Dan Path of Altus, and it resonated very deeply. I read it in about 3 days, and essentially the crux of the argument is Eastern traditions or Eastern cultures think of, have thought that's in a circle. It's a continuous feedback loop. It's holistic, just like a track race, right? An 800 meter, a mile, a 10K, you start and stop in the same place. So it's this ongoing continuous feedback loop where everything organically feeds into itself, the yin and yang theory. Western thought, we tend to think more linear. I'm here at point A and I'm going to get to point B over there. So I'm going to start at a certain point and I'm going to get to a destination. So it's a straight line. So the difference in thought here is holistic versus reductionist or absolutist. And when we think in absolute terms, we miss a lot of nuance. We miss a lot of influence that's very critical to the upbringing and also the well-being of the organism that is the competitive athlete.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that when I look at this topic, right, and I look at attacking things from a metabolic or bioenergetic system, I think of that, just like you said, is where is your frame of mind, right? Where is your mindset at? Because if we look at, let's say, a different sport, right? Or we look at the act of sprinting, right? Their model comes not maybe initially from a bioenergetic standpoint, but maybe a biomechanical standpoint, right? So when I grew up learning coaching from Tom Tellez, for example, everything started with mechanics, right? There was very little talk about, hey, this is for lactate tolerance, or this is to develop their aerobic ability. There was a little bit about that, but everything started from a biomechanical view, because in his model, that's what mattered for running 100 meters fast, right? Is this is what matters here. And hey, I'm going to have someone else, or I'm going to dabble in developing these workouts to give them the, metabolic power to be able to do this. And I think that's why it's really important from the distance world is to step back and almost look at this holistic side, like you said, and say, hey, like this workout, maybe it does this metabolically, right? But what does it do cognitively, right? And what does it do? What are the paces are they? Are they specific, right? Or are they very far off? Like all that matters because metabolically I can create a workout. I can create two workouts that attack the same system, right? And I can do it through maybe very short, fast work, or I could do it through, longer, extended, not quite fast work by just manipulating the distance and recoveries, right? So I think we have to, not get locked into this is the energetic model and we need to check these boxes. And if we don't, like, we're in trouble, and one of the things that I often thought about is, or one of the things that I think about whenever I'm asking if this model is right or not, is I think back to when the model was different, right? So in this sense, if you go back to, the 70s or 80s, you look at the energetics of running 1500 or a 5K or whatever have you. And because of the research of the day, they said that things were more anaerobic than aerobic, right?
Correct.
And then you look at in the early 2000s, research catches up. We have new methods of measuring things. And all of a sudden, the percent aerobic changes 25%. And when I look at those changes, I say, all right, like now our model, our bioenergetic, like data information has changed. But did training drastically change after that? Right? Because if you're telling me a 1500 moves by about 25% in terms of its aerobic thing, like the reaction would be like, oh my gosh, we need to start doing way more aerobic work, right?
Right.
But no, the model really didn't change that much in terms of training. So that right there tells me that, hey, maybe the foundation like provides some categorization and some structure that we need, but it's not like the be all end all here.
No, and you have to take into consideration these tertiary impacts that occur, right? So, I've recently been trying to get better at understanding the hormonal and parasympathetic sympathetic response of the nervous system to different types of activity, because we know that being in that sympathetic state, that heightened state, that fight or flight, that fight, that aroused state for too long of time consistently globally can create a lot of degradation and wear on the lymphatic system, as well as other different systems that are fundamental to the athlete's ability to repair, respond, and adapt. Same thing too, like moving people to a parasympathetic state, that more, relaxed, regenerative, and repair type situation. So what are different things that we can cue or use as catalyst? Because you have to remember, at the end of the day, the body is an amazing organism and machine. It can do difficult things and it can repair itself. It's a self-generative thing for much of, if not all of our life, right? So to think that just the aerobic metabolism is the key, and we need to spend all the time and energy working in the aerobic metabolism and sharpening that oxidative exchange between the tissues and blood, and then the excretion of the toxins, but then completely neglecting the structural dysfunction that may lie in someone's striking pattern on the ground. Are they medially deviating with their knee? Is their foot externally rotated a little bit when they're striking the ground? How is their arm carriage? What are the shin angles or shank angles, right, when they're impacting the ground? How much supination or pronation, and what degree and severity do they have? Those things structurally matter. And thankfully, by the generous work of the coaches at Altus, as well as Vern Gambetta, Dan Pass, Stu McMillan, putting this stuff out there open source for everyone to intersect with and get better, I've elevated my game and come to appreciate how important those things are. Because if we are stopped as distance coaches from being able to do threshold miles at 6 to 8 or however many with 60 seconds rest, or stopped from being able to do VO2 max if you want to use that model, 400 meters, 12 of those with 200-meter jog or whatever, because of some structural dysfunction in the athlete that puts them on the sidelines, that gets them hurt, that develops Achilles tendonitis, plantar fasciitis, short calves, etc. We are doing them fundamentally a disservice, because now we can't train to optimize performance because we didn't start at the root of the cause, or the root of the issue that's going to limit them and be a limiting factor, which is their structural integrity. So I think, again, it's elementary, and it's you must have a very firm grasp, and that's why they present it in, say, level 1 USATF courses and level 2 USATF coaching courses. You must have a firm grasp on the energetic considerations and the variant systems that exist. But, big caveat, but you need to get better. As a coach, it is your purview to elevate your game every single off season. If you're not doing something that's elevating you, and hopefully this podcast is a ingredient, but not the entire thing. Like, we encourage you to go out and find other resources. I mean, Steve and I have started a lot of the education work with High Performance West, putting that on offer because we just wanted to help put good things in the world that's going to help elevate. But find those people who are out there. And I can recommend Altus. I can recommend Hammer Media. They're trying to just do good things to contribute to the community to elevate our game as coaches. Because, if Steve gets better, if I get better, if you get better listening to a podcast, and if the athletes we're all competing can elevate, the whole sport, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. That's what we want. But I think it's worth, going down those rabbit holes. And I know I binge hard on like sprint mechanics sometimes, or biomotor learning, many years ago. I still come back to it. Like, get outside the metabolic education system and say, what are other coaches in other disciplines, whether it's other event groups within track, or even in soccer or football or basketball or swimming, what are they concerned about? And maybe is there a little bit of corollary between what they're doing and what we're doing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing is, like, you got to get out of your own sport a little bit. Why? So you can come back and see your sport through a different lens, right? And that's where I think where we're going with this coaching is not a science almost, is that if you can adopt the lens of a strength coach when looking at your running, right? What are they concerned with, right? If I'm a strength coach and I walk out to the track and I see athletes, what are they noticing, right? What is important to them? I remember as an athlete, I had one of the sprint coaches at our school came up and asked, why we didn't stop people in the middle of intervals and correct, horrible posture. And at the time I was like, well, that's dumb. Like, why would I stop
Yes.
in intervals? Like, I never do that. But, there's some legitimacy to thinking about that, right? At certain times, like, we want the bad posture, essentially, because, like, hey, you got to deal with fatigue and, like, figure your way through it. But other times, does it make sense to call out an interval and be like, hey, like, yeah, your form's going to shit. Like, you're done. Let's fix this and then come back at it, or whatever it is. But, the point that I always saw there is that coach was looking at things through a different lens than I was. Like, I was seeing the workout as like, hey, I have to nail this interval and hit this pace and deal with this fatigue and tough it through. So if my posture goes to shit, like, it doesn't matter. I'm still on pace and I'm figuring out a way. And he was seeing it as, hey, you're ingraining horrible patterns. Like, why don't you just stop and correct that? And, that lesson always stuck with me, where if we can see things through slightly different lenses, I think it gives us a greater appreciation. And it also gives us a greater skill set, right? If I'm not reliant on this workout right here is for lactate tolerance or anaerobic capacity or whatever it is, and then instead I see, hey, my mechanics are going to do this during it. My hormonal profile is going to do this. My, stress response system, sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system is going to do this. Like, there's all these different ways to look at this, right? My individual muscles, maybe my muscle fiber recruitment is going to be here because I'm running faster or slower or up a hill. Like, we can look at these workouts in countless ways. We've all just kind of been taught and become accustomed to do it in an energetic world in the endurance side. But if we can gain the capacity to use those different lenses, I think it makes us better coaches. And I think it's there where we shouldn't, be reliant on a specialist over here. Like, oh, I'm going to bring the strength coach out and tell me what he said. No, you should have a decent capacity to stick yourself in that head and understand what he's looking at as well.
Without a doubt. I think, to echo Steve a little bit here, I mean, what I heard, it's primary versus tertiary, right? What's the purpose of the busy? What is the workout for? What is the training program or design? Whether it's microcycle, mesocycle, or macrocycle, however, whatever level of elevation you want to look at, what is it for? And when you ask what's it for, and the only answer you can give is the energy system development answer, I think you have to, again, stop and pause and say, well, if I only have a hammer, then a screw needs to be hammered in. And hammers work great. Don't get me wrong. We are by no means saying, abandon the energetic and energy system model of metabolism and development. No, you need to develop all those organs in the thoracic cavity. It matters. However, we're much more than just what the organs in the thoracic cavity are. That brain is critical. The coordination is critical. The ability to express speed, express power, the ability to proprioceptively be aware of what your limbs and appendages are doing and have a certain degree of fluency and literacy about that is just as vital too. Maybe not as vital for the sprinter or the triple jumper, but it is vital for the endurance athlete. We know, right, that speed reserve, this element, this idea that the faster you get your flying 30, so the faster you can run over 30 meters, has positive impact to making up to the 10,000 meter runner on the track, the sprinter, the 100 meter runner up to the 10,000 meter runner on the track faster. Scott Christensen is, one of the foremost leading educators in America about middle distance and endurance training. He uses a lot the energetic model to present things. I've learned from him a great deal. So is Joe Feehill as well, right? There's a bunch of people with a very good expertise in physiology. However, Scott Christensen has, seen the speed reserve capacity model and said, this is important. The studies and the literature and the evidence suggests that this is going to get everyone faster, whether you're a sprinter to a 10,000 meter runner. It's something worthwhile doing. And if you're thinking, 30 meter sprints, and only can do 5 of those, that's not enough volume for the day. I think you need to question yourself, step out of that. Understand that a sprint is something that's supposed to be done at full speed and with full recovery, not the soccer shuffle, not the soccer suicides or Liverpools where, all right, we're sprinting, guys, for 6 minutes. Impossible. Impossible. We've ran on that before. But respect what you're trying to teach. If you're trying to teach speed, if you're trying to teach coordination, if you're trying to teach those things, give it the space and time it deserves. Because the idea is you want a fluency and literacy like learning a language, like riding a bike, that's permanent. The cure, the answer, the truth is permanent. I have not ridden a bike in a year and I have not forgotten. I have not spoken Spanish in 10 years and I can still think very, albeit fractionally, but somewhat I can think in Spanish because I learned it for 8 years. Even though I have not exercised those skills and exercised that competency, it has not left me. And I think we need to remember that is a really critical consideration when teaching a skill. It's not something that needs to be constantly replenished every day or you lose it. I'm going to lose fitness if I don't run today. I'm going to lose fitness if I don't do a workout today. Sure, you can think like that. That's a very scarcity model mindset. Or you can think in permanence in terms of I always have it in me, but the capacity at which I can do it is variable based off my discipline, training, or lack thereof. Good example of that is even today at the track, right? We have an athlete, a 1,500 meter woman, Rebecca Mara from Stanford, who is 411 for 15, 6 NCAAs last year. She's been on the shelf for the past couple months with not one, but 2 stress fractures when she showed up to HVW here in Portland. And so we had to just start from absolute scratch. Today, she did a broken threshold, broken lactate threshold type workout, 4 sets of 4 sets of 600 meters at a threshold rhythm, so about 80 to 82 type pace around the track, 200 meters jog in about 90 seconds. 2 sets of that, right? That gives you about 4 miles of work. Then I just threw on to her the 200 meter drill, which is essentially 5 times 200 with alternating recoveries of 100, 200, 100, 200. And the instruction was take off the watch and just run at 3K to 1500 meter rhythm. Then we talked about the Johnny Gray concept of good leg swing, good leg speed, right? Where the leg is moving crisply in the air and through the gait cycle. So when that leg's not on the ground, you're moving it quickly and crisply. And then leg speed is then, or leg swing is then when you're actually swinging the leg crisply and you're focusing and you're owning that action. You're making that happen rather than let gravity make it happen. So we talked about that on the last 2 reps. She was running about 34 to 35 for the first 3, and magically, all of a sudden, she ran 31 high, 32 flat for the last 2 200s, right? She had not done that for 6 months. This was at the end of a long day of work, her longest day of volume on the track in about 4 months because of being on the shelf for 2.5 months with injury. Where did that come from? There was no energy system development, right, to get her to run 31, 32. She was tired. She was fatigued. We talked about different cues, structural cues, kind of more proprioceptive cues. We talked about those things, and we took the watch off as a guide and just said, just do your thing, right? So it seems very, like, as Lauren Fleshman would say, very woo-woo-y, or very woo-woo, I think, right?
Yeah,
that was what she said. Yeah, very woo-woo, but it was effective. It worked. And that's the goal of training, right? The goal of training is that it has an effect and it works. So the athlete can race at the competency and threshold and capacity they wish to race, not be out of the race when the time, for racing starts to materialize.
Exactly. You brought up a lot of concepts there, and I think what it gets to is really you're almost seeing the training aspect through a lens of motor learning and skill acquisition, right? Is in that bike example, there's this fascinating video, and we'll link to it in the show notes, of someone who tried to ride a bike where he changed the steering, right? So it was like opposite of what it should be. And it's fascinating because he had to relearn how to ride a bike, and it took him months how to do it just by simply changing the steering mechanism to be opposite, right? You turn the, handlebars left and the wheel goes right, for example. And then it took him months to learn it, right? And then he learned it and he figured it out. And then he switches back to a regular bike. And like the first little bit, it's like absolutely disastrous and horrible. It looks like he can't ride a bike. And then almost instantly, like his brain kind of rewires, catches it, and then he's back to complete normal. And I think there's a lot to learn from a skill acquisition standpoint of coaching distance events or coaching whatever you are, right? And what you're describing there with the Johnny Gray of it's almost like shifting that focus of attention. How often do we put the focus of attention on actually doing the tasks versus the end goal of the task, right? As coaches, we always say, hey, go run these 200s in 33. And then we don't really, give a reason or give any other cue to do that. The athlete is taking in, hey, I'm going to run this in 33 seconds and I'm going to do it however I need to do that. Right? Johnny Gray and Igloy, who founded this stuff, takes the focus of attention and said, no, like, hey, I want you to feel this swing, right? What does the swing mean? Well, it had a definition and knowledge to Igloy, to Johnny, to whoever it is, right? And he's taking that intention, it becomes, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this, and then the time's going to kind of take care of itself. And I think in the sports world, we've kind of lost that ability or that intuitive sense of that rhythm, right? And that's the thing that is really funny when you get older as an athlete. You know, back before I was banged up, actually last year, while I was still banged up as an athlete, I was out in England at St. Mary's University teaching a bunch of strength coaches about running and kind of nailing this idea of rhythm home. And I sat there and, you know, probably a little brash, and I said, hey, like, if you wanted me to, like, I could go run a 60-second quarter without a watch and I'd be dead on.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, nah, you can't do that. You can't do it. That's going to be off. And I was like, all right, like, I'll try it. You know? and granted, like, I am out of shape, right? I am not in good shape. I was coming off of a long layoff and hadn't run that pace for probably, you know, a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But I just take my watch off, say, okay, someone say start, someone gonna go, you know, and I went out and I ran like 60.3.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing isn't to be like, oh, Steve, you're so great at this. It's like, no, I did so much work on that pace. And then I had coaches like my high school coaches like Coach Delez, who kind of ingrained this, hey, like, find your rhythm concept. And it's just there. It's like riding a bike. And I think if we're looking at running, we have to pay attention to that. You know, actually this morning, one of my post-collegiate athletes, a half marathon, 10K type guy, Ryan Donor, was at the track, and we were doing a kind of alternation workout. And afterwards, he makes this comment. He said, you know, running 70 seconds, I can get into a rhythm. Running 75 seconds, I feel like I'm running just easy enough, right? Where I can kind of settle, but not hard enough where I have to press. So it's harder. It's like running 5 minutes feels harder for a while than just getting into this 70 second rhythm. And we had this long talk about how that's just because, like, he's found that rhythm at that 440 pace for whatever reason, right? And he hasn't, like, found that at 5 minute pace for whatever reason, right? And I think that a lot of times, if we can teach athletes that skill and shift the focus from, hey, this workout is about this energetic system right now, and instead it's about, hey, like, what's our focus of attention on? Like, what rhythm are we trying to establish? We're going to put our athletes in a better position to race.
And the key with this, right, is that the bioenergetics model is about creating a more robust or bigger or bigger capacity to be able to do these skills. So Steve can run one quarter in 60 point now, or a year ago. Now, if you ask him to run 10, that capacity to run 10 and 60 point, that's going to be compromised because he hasn't done the, work. If you're asking him to run, say, 10 with a certain threshold of recovery or a certain threshold of time in between. So if you're asking Steve now, to run 60 points with 2 minutes rest, maybe you get to 5, maybe 6, I don't know. I mean, but to do 10 requires a certain degree of conditioning. To require 10 requires a certain degree of energy system development, right? Because that capacity is the thing that we're trying to increase. So remember, the ability in the athlete, the ability to run a certain pace or a certain speed is always there. We just have it, right? The cat can just jump. The cat, can jump. I mean, I watched my cat just now recording this podcast. She jumped from the floor to the top of the couch, here in our den. And I was like, wow, that's impressive. She just did it, but the ability to do it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, that's the capacity component is what you're really training when you're thinking from a bioenergetic standpoint. But that athlete's ability to run 115 point, a 232 point, they inherently have the ability. Now you're trying to make it so they can express that over the long term, right? And so, again, lot of times we think of like bioenergetic development as the primary impulse for training, but it actually is one of many tertiary impacts. And so if you have a model where you're looking at things through a more complex or more varied or more kaleidoscope type lens, then you can say, is this primary or tertiary? Really, everything is tertiary. There is an emphasis where, we work on this element or this element in training. And yeah, there's primarily we're trying to get this type of stimulus, to get this type of response, to get this type of adaptation. But if you pick the right stimuli, there's a host of different tertiary impacts that are all complementary and beneficial to the athlete. And that's how we get better as coaches, right? Is just focusing on the simple classic things. I've been privileged to be able to like have mentors that include like very famous coaches, right? Jerry Schumacher, Rob Connor at UP, and Vin Ladana. All three of them I've talked to them about energy system development, and they go, that is kind of like it is an ingredient, it is something I consider, but it's not the primary purpose or not the primary reason we do any workouts. It is a good complement and a good, this happens to happen type situation, but they're trying to get people race ready, competitive ready. And if you're sitting here with a scientific, mindset of saying, in scientific being, actually, we should actually just call it accounting, and not counting mindset of saying, I need to get this type of minutes of stimulus in at this threshold or this metabolic capacity. I encourage you to expand your framework, because the scientific method, and Steve, tell me if I'm wrong here. I'm the philosopher, you're the scientist here.
Uh-oh.
The scientific method, from what I understand as a philosopher, is create a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, look at the evidence from that test, draw a conclusion from your experiment, and if it wasn't the conclusion that aligned with your hypothesis, reshape your hypothesis, reshape the test, and then test again. Is that right, or am I totally off base here?
You're 100% right.
Okay, but the scientific method
there you go.
From the philosopher. Thank goodness I got that.
So, it's funny, and this is a slight tangent, then I'll come back on, but that's why I love the famous scientist Carl Sagan. Wrote in one of his books, and he talked about how hunter-gatherers were scientists to him. Why? Because, over time, they would test, they would, come up with a hypothesis, test it, and see if it worked, and if it did, pass it down, right? If the leaves moved, or the tree, or the branches bended in a certain way, then they thought that, that meant an animal went that way, then they would, pass that knowledge down. But if they didn't, they wouldn't. And his point there was to say that science is about, this process and this almost like way of thinking about things and testing them out versus, just data analytics, accounting, for lack of a better term. So
yeah, there's no meta-analysis going on here, right? And you have to remember, science is like the bell cow of evolution. Because if we were in 1920 and you heard Steve have a little cough, well, in 1920, you go to the doctor and the doctor begged, hey, Steve, you have a cough. You should smoke cigarettes for a little while. Why? Because it'll dry out your lungs and it will make your cough go away, because that was the literature and understanding at that time period was tobacco smoking helped coughs. We know that's completely wrong. Completely wrong now. But that was the best we could do with the data we had at the time. Yeah. And that's really all we're doing, right? We're doing the best we can do with the education or data we have at the time.
That's why John and I are going to be in trouble in 40 years when these podcasts still exist, and you guys are going to figure out some genius way to coach, and we're going to look like idiots. But that's okay.
Yes, that's all right.
Better. So it's all good. Make us look dumb. And, tying it back to running, I think one of the things that is really important to say is we're not like dogging on bioenergetics or metabolism and stuff. Like, you need to know that. Like, John and I spent, years trying to understand that stuff. We read as many books. I read scientific textbooks on metabolism of exercise and all this different stuff. And I think it's important to understand. But what we're saying is that, or what I've seen is a lot of times is we're taught this metabolic model. And then what it does is it almost prevents thinking because we start worrying about checking the metabolic boxes, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did we get our threshold work in? Did we get our VO2 max work in? Did we get our anaerobic capacity work in? Like, however you divide it metabolically, like, that's what we're after. Or how much did we get 20 minutes of tempo work in? Because that's the amount we think we need to, hit to get some sort of adaptation. The reality is it's all at an individual level, and like you and I have no idea how much like of anything it takes to get, trigger the body to adapt metabolically. But we just kind of educated guess it. And I think if you can get yourself out of this mindset a little bit and open it up to understand like everything that the workout is telling you and everything that you can develop off of it, then you become a better coach, right? And you free yourself up to explore performance versus explore, checking the energetic boxes.
And I think, you're kind of dancing around this idea of the expectation effect, right? In psychology, we know that the expectation effect is a form of reactivity that happens when the patient or the practitioner or the executor of a certain action expects a certain outcome from what they're doing. So if you say to your athletes you're working with, all right, guys, today is a lactate threshold type effort. We're going to go a 4-mile tempo run, and then we're going to do some cruise miles at a little quicker than the 4-mile tempo run pace. So we're going to do the 4-mile tempo run at 15K race pace, and we'll do the cruise miles, 3 or 4 of them at 10K race pace. What this will then do is it will get you guys better at running 10K. And so by infusing that expectation in the athlete, or even you as the coach, expecting that this type of work, a 4-mile tempo plus cruise miles at 10K pace, is going to make them better at the 10K. And everyone buys in, everyone agrees, everyone, is in agreement. Yeah, you're going to get better at the 10K because we know that expectation effect from a psychological standpoint is very potent. So too, we have to understand that confirmation bias and that expectation go hand in hand. So we can sit here and rationally think this will make us better, right? Just how Lydiard got Peter Snell to buy into doing marathon training, running 100 miles a week. Hey, Peter, I have a great idea. You're going 100 miles a week for like 6 months, and you're going to get a lot better at the 800. And run a world record on the grass. Very difficult to do. Peter bought into it. David Rashida, you swing the pendulum the other way. The guy, works on form and biomechanics and technique with, other young athletes in Kenya, like youth athletes under the watchfly of Brother O'Callum, before they kind of distance themselves a little bit. And he was able to run a world record in 140 on the track, right, at the Olympics. The most difficult crucible to do it. So we have markers about how there's a lot of different roads to Rome, right? However, there are several and many wrong roads to Rome, which are dead ends. But expectation and the effect of expectation, if you fundamentally have that belief and you infuse it in the people you work with and the athletes that you're, that entrust you to care for them and care for their development, their career, that's important too, right? And that's where we get into this blending of the psychophysiological consideration. They're not two separate things, right? It's not this multidisciplinary or even interdisciplinary approach. It's this transdisciplinary approach where things are integrated and impact each other in a very harmonious ecosystem. And it's difficult, right? Because it's very complex. The Steve and I's, comprehension of very complex thing is very rudiment, even in today. And we work hard, man. We're reading, we're doing a lot of things, we're interacting, we're intersecting with a lot of different people outside our domain, trying to get better and then pass it on so everyone else can get better too. But we have to understand fundamentally that complexity can either be a impulse that cripples us or an impulse that is an impetus to cause curiosity and then go get better. We try to offer the mindset of man, if you don't know it, go get better. And we don't know a lot of things, and we try to get better. That's why we go seek out mentors, and we go seek out different books or research articles or conferences or podcasts ourselves, or you name it, man. I mean, ad nauseum. It's always like getting better, getting better, getting better, getting better. How much better are we getting? I don't know, Steve. What, like 1 inch in a year? Maybe.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah,
but
and I think that's, if I look at the maybe the lesson of this podcast, right? If we reflect on, it's not to trash or diss on energetics or metabolism or the exercise physiology model of training. Instead, I think it's to help send the message that you need to open your eyes, open your world. And I can say this as someone who, as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old young runner and coach who was obsessed with understanding the science of it all, hence the books, The Science of Running, which I think was incredibly valuable to my growth as an athlete and as a coach. But you've got to open your eyes to see as many different aspects or views or lenses as you can in this sport or in anything you're trying to understand at a deep level. And the reality is it's always going to be more complex than you or I can handle, John. That's the complexity of the human body and brain. It's always going to be there. But if we can understand, as many lenses as we can, then what happens over time as we each kind of figure out our own little model, right? We take bits and pieces that make sense and then work when we try them on our athletes. And we say, oh, okay, that's going to stick in my model, right? And your model, John, is going to be different than mine, even though, we talk all the time. And our model is going to be different from someone else's.
Drastically. I mean, your model is different from my model. It's different from Danny Mackey's. It's different from Mike Smith's. It's different from Rob Connors. It's different from Jerry Schumacher's. I mean, you go on and on and on, but they all work.
Exactly. And I think that's what we're trying to encourage you as coaches is, I know from experience, it's tempting to get stuck in your model development because you're like, oh, let's take this energetics. It makes sense. The 1500 is 75% aerobic, so I'm going to train this many aerobic miles per week and this many anaerobic to, balance things out because that's what the event demands are. And it kind of makes sense in that way. So then you just check the boxes and plug and play workouts and you're good to go. And
I think the most fun story I can relate to this is last year, Prefontaine Classic. I was privileged enough to somehow be able to spend a couple hours, 2-3 hours at lunch with Renato Canova, right? The famed marathon Kenyan coach and multi-federation coach of Qatar as well as China. He classic Italian. He's Italian. So he had his pasta. I mean, it was pasta and spaghetti sauce, as you expect. But what was his dessert? Vegetables and fruit on the same plate being consumed at the same time. Lettuce and pineapple, apple and tomato, cucumber and grape. He just ate it. I was like, whoa, that's a fruit salad. That's a legitimate fruit salad. I asked Canova, I said, Canova, where'd you learn? He goes, it's the relationships. It's like training. It's the relationship. Who says you have to have the fruit separate from the vegetables? Together, it's very good. The body loves the relation. I was like, yep, that changed my mind. And it was one of those things where we weren't talking about training. We were talking about the man eating fruit and vegetables concurrently in the same bite, which from an American Western mindset, at the time for me was like, well, yeah, you have your fruit and you have your vegetables. They're different things together, blended. And it's understanding that blend. It's like language. Training models are like languages. Just because I speak Spanish and Steve speaks Japanese or, Danny Mackey speaks Portugal, there's a theme, like some Romance languages, like languages based off the energetic enhancement. They're all under the same umbrella, and there can be deviations of it. And then sometimes, you got Greek, and it's completely different, but it's a foundation for a lot of language and words that we have today in our, Western culture. So understanding that these models are languages, and we're not trying to say here you got to develop your own language, but to a certain degree, you do as a coach, and you have to understand where your influence is coming from. And that's why, Steve and I have done things like the Supreme Scholars Program at HPW, where we do a deep dive into the history of training and literacy and understand where these concepts of fartlek intervals, tempo, marathon training, who originated them, where did they come from, why are they stuck around, why are they still successful back then and even now? Because when you know concretely the source, then you are better empowered to make up your mind. So it's important that we do our history and our research as coaches, rather than just say, oh yeah, this is the way my coach coached me, or I don't believe in this and I don't believe in that, because when I was an athlete, I didn't do that and I was just fine. That to me is a very dangerous mindset. Have an open mind, be definitely firm in your, certainty about what you know, but also know that you don't know a lot of things too, and have an open mind and learn to get better, because that's the way you as a, professional, and also your athletes that are under your care can progress as well.
Well, I couldn't have said it better. I think we're going to end on that Canova fruits and vegetables.
I know, it's so cool.
It's so good.
I still geek out about it.
Yeah, I love it. But it's a perfect way, again, to look at training through a slightly different lens of, eating fruits and vegetables together or separate. And how do we look at training? Do you look at it as these individual pieces, or this blending of it together? Do we separate or do we blend? So, ponder on that for a while. While you're pondering, maybe check out highperformancewest.com and all the cool programs that John and I are starting up to really amp up coaches' education and really more so pass down some knowledge. And then also check out our sponsor, again, Health IQ. They're doing some great things and saving people who are trying to live healthy and happy lives, saving them money on life insurance. So healthiq.com/oncoaching. It would really help us out if you check them out and support the podcast.
Well, to help you out too, because as long as we have a sponsor, we're going to give things away, whether it's money or stuff. Like, if we're going to sell out a little bit, we're going to make sure we give back to the people. Because you know what? We, ascribe to the Marcus Aurelius mind frame of the, benevolent dictators, if you will. Not really. But again, give back to the people. You're the ones who gave us the privilege to have a sponsor. So it just makes sense to give back. Exactly. And we're going to continue to do that as long as we have even when we don't have a sponsor, man, we're just going to give back, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for y'all. So thank you for listening. It's track season. People have been hitting us up on Twitter and on email. It's in the queue. Thank you. We're just like you. We got athletes. We got real-time problems to solve every day at practice. Like I remind people, I go to practice to learn. I learn more at practice than, I learn from any other forum. I mean, I learn a lot from reading and, coaching conferences and talking to colleagues and mentors, but the athletes teach me the most because they force me to solve real problems in real times, thankfully with their feedback and input. And we're in the heart of season, right? So even if the podcast delivery here that we offer is a little bit inconsistent, that's just par for the course. We will get back to you. If it takes me 3 months, or it takes me 3 weeks, or it takes me 3 minutes, I try to respond to every request that's thrown across my table, but just be patient. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just going to work just like you. And so, Steve.
Exactly. 100%. Skin in the game, man. Skin in the game.
Amen. That's, we were trying to get this podcast earlier today, but Steve was like, I got practice. I got this workout. I got this meeting. I got this. I go, I get it. Thankfully, today is one of my office days, so I just keep my open calendar, and I was able to be flexible. But do the work. Show up. Do the work. That's what matters. And thanks for listening.